At 6 o'clock in this morning on December 31st, the intercom in my Los Angeles apartment started buzzing like an emergency alarm. I opened my eyes in the darkness of my bedroom, my heart pounding in my chest, thinking something awful had happened. I got up, stumbling with my slippers, the cold floor cutting through my bare feet, and walked toward the entrance without turning on the lights. I pressed the button and heard something that sent a chill down my spine. There were 12 people, 12 relatives of Bethany, my daughter-in-law, standing outside the building door with enormous suitcases, grocery bags, children half asleep in their arms, and the look of people who expected to be welcomed with open arms. Esther's voice, Bethany's mother, came through the speaker with that fake sweetness I already knew too well. "Rhonda, dear, we've arrived. Robert told us to come straight to your place. Please open up. The kids are exhausted from the drive." I felt my fingers freeze on the intercom button. Robert, my son. He had given them my address. He had told them to come to my apartment without asking me, without giving me any notice, without even considering that I might have other plans or simply the desire to be alone. I turned on the speaker, and what came out of my mouth at that moment was barely a choked whisper, but the words I said afterward changed absolutely everything. Let me explain how I reached that breaking point, because none of this makes sense without context. My name is Rhonda. I am 69 years old, and I live alone in a 7th-floor apartment that smells of fresh coffee in the mornings and lavender at night. This place is my sanctuary, my territory, the only space in the world where I can breathe without asking permission. After my husband James passed away 5 years ago, this apartment became more than a home. It became my complete identity. Every object has its exact place. The white porcelain mugs are sorted by size on the top shelf of the kitchen. The books in the living room are organized alphabetically, though hardly anyone ever comes to look at them. The plants on the balcony get watered every Wednesday and Saturday, without fail, and they have grown so much that some already touch the ceiling. My routine is sacred. I get up at 7, make coffee in the Italian stovetop espresso maker I brought back from my trip to Rome 15 years ago, and sit by the window to watch the city wake up. The buildings across from mine light up window by window, like tiny lights on a giant Christmas tree. I hear the sound of the cars far below, the distant murmur of life continuing. But from up here, everything feels soft, manageable, under control. I always eat the same thing for breakfast: toast with strawberry jam, a small portion of cream cheese, and an apple cut into quarters. Then I wash the dishes immediately, because I can't stand to see the kitchen messy. I wipe down the table with a damp cloth, arrange the chairs, and then start my day. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I go to the farmer's market. I walk slowly through the aisles, checking every product, comparing prices even though I already know the cost of everything by heart. I like to touch the fruit, feel its texture, smell it to know if it's ripe. The lady who sells vegetables already knows me and always sets aside the firmest tomatoes for me. On Friday afternoons, I go to my knitting class at the neighborhood community center. There are 6 of us women, all over 60, and we sit in a circle knitting scarves, hats, and blankets while we talk about our lives. They discuss their grandchildren, their aches and pains, the issues with their adult children who never visit. I listen more than I talk. I don't like to share too much. I learned that when you tell people your problems, they later use them against you. Robert is my only son. He is 42 years old. He works at a tech company whose purpose I never quite understood, and he has been married to Bethany for 8 years. In the beginning, when he introduced her to me, I thought she was a nice girl. She smiled a lot. She brought pie when they came to visit. She asked about my health. But over time, I started to notice things. Small details I initially ignored because I didn't want to be that bitter mother-in-law who hates her son's wife. Bethany has a way of speaking that seems kind, but is full of invisible thorns. She'll say, "Oh, Rhonda, your blouse is nice," even though that particular shade of green isn't very popular anymore, leaving you unsure if you've been complimented or insulted. She rearranges things in my kitchen when she visits, moving my pots and pans out of their spot and saying it's more practical this way without asking if I want her to touch my things. Once, she brought a new tablecloth and put it on my dining table without a word, saying mine was too worn out, as if my opinion didn't matter in my own home. But I kept quiet, always quiet, because Robert seemed happy, and I didn't want to be the mother who causes trouble. Every time I felt that irritation building in my chest, I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I needed to be understanding, that modern families are like this, that I come from a different generation, and perhaps I was being too sensitive. I swallowed the words, smiled, and nodded, storing every small humiliation in an invisible drawer inside my chest that kept filling up more and more. My relationship with Robert changed after he got married. Before, he called me 3 times a week. We used to have lunch together on Sundays. He told me about his problems at work, his plans for the future. But Bethany arrived, and little by little, she built a wall between us, so thin it was barely noticeable, yet so solid we couldn't touch each other anymore. The calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. The lunches were canceled with last-minute excuses. They had a commitment. Bethany wasn't feeling well. The traffic was terrible. And I accepted everything without complaining, because that's what good mothers do, right? They step aside, they don't bother, they don't demand, they simply wait for their children to remember them occasionally. That morning of December 31st, with the intercom buzzing and those 12 people waiting downstairs, all those swallowed words, all those accumulated silences, all those times I said yes when I wanted to scream no, gathered in my throat like a fireball. I pressed the intercom button and heard my own voice come out strangely calm, almost cold. "Wait a moment. I'm coming down to open up." I hung up before Esther could reply. I stood in front of the device, looking at the little red light blinking in the dark hallway, and something inside me broke. It wasn't a dramatic rupture. There were no tears or screams. It was more like a glass breaking in slow motion. First, a thin, almost invisible crack appears, and then everything crumbles into pieces so small they can't be put back together. I walked to my bedroom, turned on the light, and saw myself in the closet mirror. A woman of 69 with disheveled gray hair, a face marked by sleep, and tired eyes. I wondered when I had become invisible to my own son. When did my life stop mattering? I dressed slowly, choosing each garment with care, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Brown pants, a cream-colored blouse, a mustard yellow knitted sweater I had made myself last winter. I washed my face with cold water, brushed my hair back into a low ponytail, and put on my glasses. I needed to see everything clearly, every detail, every gesture, every word that was to come. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. I needed those 7 flights of distance to think, to prepare myself, to decide what I was going to do. My steps echoed in the stairwell, a dry, solitary sound that reminded me of my heartbeat. When I opened the building door, the pre-dawn chill hit my face like a slap. There they all were. Esther with her huge, fake smile, carrying a bag full of plastic containers that surely held food I hadn't asked for. Randy, her husband, a big, loud man who always spoke too loudly, was dragging 2 giant suitcases. There were 3 of Bethany's siblings with their respective spouses, 4 small children running around the adults' legs, and 2 teenagers glued to their phones who didn't even look up when I appeared. They all looked at me with that expression of relief, as if I were their salvation, as if my apartment were a refuge that belonged to them by divine right. "Rhonda, so glad you opened up quickly," Esther said, moving toward me as if we were lifelong friends. "The trip was awful. 8 hours on the road. The kids wouldn't stop crying, and Randy missed the exit twice. We're exhausted. Robert told us there was no problem, that you'd be thrilled to have us for New Year's. How lovely to have such a generous mother-in-law, right?" She hugged me before I could step back, and I smelled her sickly sweet perfume mixed with travel sweat. She let go and started ushering everyone inside the building, as if she owned the place. I didn't say anything. Absolutely nothing. I just stood there, holding the door open as they filed in, dragging luggage, carrying children, all talking at once about the traffic, the heat, the tiredness, the excitement of spending the holidays in the city. No one asked how I was. No one asked if it was truly okay for them to come. No one seemed to notice that it was 6 o'clock in the morning and I had just been woken up without any consideration. We took the elevator in 2 groups because we couldn't all fit. I went up on the second trip, squeezed between suitcases and the smell of reheated food coming from Esther's containers. The elevator ascended slowly, making that metallic noise it always makes, and I watched the numbers light up one after the other. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Each floor was 1 second closer to the moment I would have to open the door to my apartment and let in the chaos. When we arrived, the first group was already waiting outside. I took the keys out of my pocket and held them for a moment in my hand, feeling the weight of the cold metal. These keys opened my sacred space, my place of peace, my only refuge in the world. And I was about to hand it over to a group of strangers who didn't even consider me enough to announce their arrival. I put the key in the lock, turned it, and the door opened with a soft click. They all streamed in like a wave, invading every corner, filling the silence with voices and laughter and heavy footsteps. The children ran into the living room, screaming with excitement. Randy dropped the suitcases in the middle of the hallway with a dull thud. Esther went straight to the kitchen, opening cabinets and the refrigerator as if it were her own home, commenting loudly that we needed to go grocery shopping because there wasn't enough food for everyone. I stood by the closed door, watching as my quiet, orderly apartment transformed into a bustling marketplace in a matter of minutes. One of the children knocked over one of my balcony plants, and dirt spilled all over the hardwood floor. No one apologized. One of Bethany's sisters-in-law sat down on my favorite armchair, the one by the window where I sit every morning for coffee, and put her dirty feet up on my coffee table. The teenagers went into my bedroom without asking permission, looking for outlets to charge their phones. Esther started taking all her container food out and filling up my refrigerator, moving my things to the back, throwing away my yogurt that, according to her, was already expired even though I had bought it 3 days ago. And then my phone rang. It was Robert. Of course, it was Robert. I answered, and his voice sounded cheerful, carefree, as if everything were perfectly normal. "Hey, Mom, did they get there yet? Sorry I didn't let you know sooner, but it came up last minute. Bethany's family needed a place to stay for the holidays, and I figured you wouldn't mind. You live alone anyway and have plenty of extra space. It's only for a few days. Bethany and I will arrive tomorrow night for New Year's Eve dinner. Have you prepared everything yet? Remember, there are about 20 of us, counting everyone. Buy enough food, okay? And Mom, please be nice to my wife's family. You know how Bethany is. She gets offended easily." I closed my eyes. I pressed the phone against my ear until it hurt. I felt all the words I had stored for years starting to rise in my throat, hot and sharp like knives. But I didn't let them out. Not yet. Instead, I took a deep breath and said in the calmest voice I could manage, "I understand, son. Don't worry. I'll take care of everything." I hung up before he could respond. I stood there in the middle of the hallway, surrounded by strangers who had invaded my home, listening to the noise of the screaming children, of Esther reorganizing my kitchen, of Randy turning up my television to full volume. And it was at that precise moment that I knew exactly what I was going to do. I didn't explode. I didn't yell. I didn't ask them to leave. That's what anyone would have expected, right? That a 69-year-old woman would lose her temper in the face of such an invasion and kick everyone out into the street. But I learned a long time ago that silent rage is far more powerful than shouting. People expect a scene, they prepare for a fight, but no one knows what to do with icy calm. So, I smiled. I approached Esther in the kitchen and said to her sweetly, "It's great that you brought food. Make yourself at home. This is your place." She looked at me surprised, perhaps expecting some objection, but she only found my perfectly calm smile. I patted her on the shoulder and left the kitchen, leaving her confused. I walked into the living room where Randy had turned the television to a sports channel with the volume so loud it made the glasses on the shelf vibrate. I sat down on the sofa next to him, crossed my legs, and asked with genuine interest, "What are they broadcasting?" He looked at me out of the corner of his eye, surprised that I wasn't asking him to turn the volume down, and started explaining something about a football championship that I honestly didn't care about at all. I nodded, asked questions, acted like the perfect hostess. The children were still running around the apartment. One of them climbed onto my couch with muddy shoes. His mother, one of Bethany's sisters named Sarah, didn't even scold him. I got up, brought a damp cloth, and cleaned the sofa while saying to the boy, "Don't worry, sweetie, accidents happen." Sarah looked at me with relief, clearly expecting me to make a fuss. I spent that entire day being the perfect grandmother, the ideal mother-in-law, the generous hostess everyone expected me to be. I made coffee for everyone. I took clean sheets from my closet and helped make makeshift beds in the living room and the den. I even lent my own bedroom to Esther and Randy because they needed privacy and comfort at their age, as Esther put it, without any irony. I would sleep on the couch in the living room, in my own house, on the couch. But I nodded with a smile and said it was absolutely no problem, that they had a long journey and deserved a good rest. Esther's face when I said that was one of absolute satisfaction, as if she had won a battle I didn't even know we were fighting. During lunch, which of course I had to cook because the food they brought wasn't enough for everyone, I heard Bethany's sisters talking about me as if I weren't present. They were sitting at my table, eating my food, using my dishes, and one of them, Diane, said, "Bethany is so lucky to have such a quiet mother-in-law. Mine is unbearable, always getting into everything." The other one, Susan, replied with a laugh, "Well, this little old lady lives alone. She has nothing better to do than wait on us. She must be happy to have company." Little old lady, that's what she called me, as if I were an old, useful piece of furniture that was there for their convenience. I continued serving the food, smiling, nodding, without saying a single word. In the afternoon, while everyone was napping, scattered throughout my apartment as if it were a free hostel, I went out onto the balcony to breathe. The plants I had cared for over the years were crushed by the suitcases someone had carelessly piled up. The dirt was still scattered all over the floor. No one had cleaned up the mess. I bent down, picked up the pieces of the broken pot, and held them in my hands. That plant was a fern that James had given me on our 20th anniversary. It had survived one move, 2 terrible winters, and 5 years without him. And now it was destroyed because a careless child hadn't been taught to respect other people's things. I felt something harden inside my chest, like when cement dries and becomes solid, immovable stone. That night, after preparing dinner for everyone, after washing the dishes while the others watched television, after tucking the children into makeshift mattresses on the floor of my den, I sat on the living room sofa where I was supposed to sleep. It was 11 o'clock at night. The apartment was finally silent, although I could hear Randy's snoring coming from my bedroom. My bedroom, where another person was sleeping in my bed, under my sheets, surrounded by my things. I took out my phone and looked at the screen. Robert hadn't called back, not even a text asking how I was, if I needed help, if everything was going well. Nothing. For him, I had simply fulfilled my function, to be the empty space where others could deposit their problems. I opened my contact list and searched for a name I hadn't dialed in months. Henry, my younger brother. He lives in another state. We don't talk much, but we've always had that silent connection that siblings who have survived a difficult childhood together share. I dialed his number. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding sleepy. "Rhonda, what happened? Are you okay?" I realized I was crying only when I heard my own voice break when I answered. "Henry, I need to ask you something. Do you remember your friend David, the one who works in real estate?" There was silence on the other end. Then his voice, now completely awake and alert. "Yes, why?" I took a deep breath, wiped my tears with the back of my hand, and said, "I need to sell my apartment. Fast." What followed was a 40-minute conversation in a low voice so as not to wake anyone. Henry didn't ask stupid questions. He didn't tell me I was overreacting or that I should think it over. He just listened as I told him everything. The invasion, Robert's words, years of being ignored and minimized, the broken plant, the muddy sofa, my own bed occupied by strangers. When I finished, he sighed and said, "You deserve better than this, sis. Give me until tomorrow. David is good. He'll help you." We hung up, and I sat there in the darkness, feeling my decision take solid shape within me. It wasn't revenge. Or maybe it was, but of the purest kind. To reclaim what was mine, even if it meant destroying everything in the process. December 31st dawned with more chaos. The children woke up at 6, screaming that they were hungry. Esther came out of my bedroom yawning and demanding coffee as if I were a housekeeper. Bethany called at 8 to say she and Robert would arrive later because they had to stop by a friend's place first. Later. In my mind, I translated that as, "You are not a priority. I am not a priority. I hung up the phone and continued preparing breakfast for 12 people who ate as if they hadn't eaten in days, without saying thank you, without clearing a plate, without cleaning up a single crumb. While everyone was eating breakfast, the doorbell rang. It was David. Henry had kept his word. I opened the door, and there was a man in his 50s. Gray suit, briefcase in hand, professional smile. "Mrs. Rhonda? I'm David, your brother Henry's friend. I'm here about the apartment." I ushered him in. Esther looked up from the table, confused. "Who is that?" I smiled sweetly and replied, "A friend who came to help me with some boring paperwork. Don't worry, keep eating." David and I closed ourselves off on the balcony. I showed him every corner of the apartment from the outside, and I explained the situation to him. He took notes, nodded, evaluated. After 20 minutes, he looked at me seriously and said, "I can get you a buyer in 1 week. I have several clients looking in this area, but it has to be quick, and the price will be a little less than what you could get with more time." I looked him in the eye and said without hesitation, "I accept." We spent the entire day finalizing details, while Bethany's family turned my apartment into a battleground. There was clothing thrown everywhere, dirty dishes piling up in the kitchen, stains on my beige rug that would never completely come out. Susan went into my bathroom and used my cosmetics without asking permission, leaving everything a mess. One of the children found my memory box in the closet and scattered old photographs across the living room floor. Pictures of James, of Robert when he was little, of my wedding, all trampled by dirty shoes. I picked up each photograph carefully, cleaned them, and put them away again. No one apologized. No one even seemed to notice that something valuable had been mistreated. At 7 o'clock that evening, Robert and Bethany finally arrived. She entered radiantly, wearing a coral-colored dress that probably cost more than $500, her hair perfectly styled, impeccable makeup. Robert followed her, carrying 2 bottles of wine and a bag of gifts. They greeted me with quick kisses on the cheek and then went straight to hug Bethany's family, laughing, making jokes, acting as if this were the most natural place in the world for them to be. Bethany looked around, evaluating every detail, and said loudly, "Rhonda, the house is a mess. You couldn't have kept it more organized." That was when something inside me made the final click. I stood there looking at Bethany with her coral dress and her perfect smile, waiting for my response. All eyes in the living room turned toward me. Esther stopped talking. Randy turned down the volume on the television. Even the children were still for a second. It was the perfect moment to explode, to say everything I had kept quiet, to defend my territory and my dignity. But I had learned something very important in my 69 years. People like Bethany feed on direct conflict. They expect a fight because they know how to win it. They are practiced at playing the victim, at flipping the situation, at making you the villain of the story. So, instead of taking the bait, I smiled and said softly, "You're right, Bethany. With so many people, it's hard to keep order. But don't worry. I've already found the perfect solution, so this won't happen again." She blinked, confused. Robert looked at me with relief, clearly thinking I had given in, that I had accepted my place as the submissive, compliant mother-in-law. "That's my girl, Mom," he said, patting me on the shoulder, as if I were a child who had finally understood the lesson. "I knew you'd understand. Family is the most important thing, right?" I nodded, kept my smile, and went back to the kitchen to continue preparing the New Year's Eve dinner. As I chopped vegetables, I listened to their conversations in the living room. Bethany talking about her job, boasting about a recent promotion. Robert laughing with his in-laws, discussing a trip they planned to take to Europe in the spring. No one asked how I was. No one offered to help with the food. I was just the backdrop where they performed their play. Dinner was ready at 9 o'clock that night. Roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, salads, fresh-baked bread, desserts. I spent close to $300 on groceries that I bought with my own retirement funds, money I had been saving to fix a leak in the bathroom. The dining table wasn't big enough, so we had to use the den table as well and put boards on sawhorses in the living room. 20 people crammed together, eating, talking, laughing. I served every plate, filled every glass, made sure everyone had enough. When I finally sat down, there was almost no food left. Robert didn't even notice. He was too busy toasting with Randy, promising him that next year they would all come to their city to celebrate there. After dinner came the time for gifts. Bethany had brought a huge bag full of packages wrapped in shiny paper, gifts for her parents, her siblings, the children. Everyone opened them with excitement, shouting and thanking her. There was nothing for me, not even a card. Robert noticed and looked uncomfortable. "Mom, sorry, in the rush, we forgot your gift. We'll bring it to you next week. Deal?" Next week, as if I were a pending task on his to-do list. Bethany didn't even have the decency to apologize. She just shrugged and said, "Well, Rhonda never tells us what she wants. It's hard to buy her things." "Because you never asked me," I thought. But out loud I just said, "Don't worry, I don't need anything." It was 20 minutes before midnight when Bethany decided to rearrange my living room. She literally started moving furniture because, according to her, it would look better for pictures that way. She pushed my favorite armchair against the wall, shoved the coffee table into a corner, and changed the lamp's location. Esther was helping her, both of them laughing and decorating my space as if it were a photo studio. I watched them from the kitchen while doing dishes, seeing how they transformed my home into something unrecognizable. Susan took out her phone and started taking pictures for her social media, posing in front of my window with a glass of wine in hand, with a caption I managed to read over her shoulder. New Year's Eve with family at the nicest mother-in-law's house in the world. She didn't even know my name. Midnight arrived. Everyone toasted, hugged, and yelled Happy New Year with a joy that seemed obscene to me. Robert gave me a quick, distracted hug, already looking for Bethany for the midnight kiss. No one else greeted me. I stood by the window, watching the fireworks light up the sky, thinking of all the New Year's Eves I had spent in this apartment. The first ones with James, when we were still young and had dreams. The years with Robert as a child, when he ran through the living room with party hats and noisemakers. The first years alone, sad and silent, learning to live with the emptiness. And now this one, surrounded by people, but lonelier than ever. At 1 o'clock in the morning, when everyone was tired of dancing and drinking, Bethany announced that she and Robert would be leaving to sleep at a hotel. Of course they would leave. They had only come for dinner, for the photos, to fulfill the minimum protocol. They wouldn't stay to help clean up the mess or to deal with the relatives they had brought. Robert gave me a kiss on the forehead and said, "Thanks for everything, Mom. I knew I could count on you." And they left, leaving me with 12 people who started getting ready to sleep, claiming spaces, asking for clean sheets, complaining about the heat, the cold, the discomfort. Esther grabbed my arm as I tried to go to the bathroom and said to me with that sweet but firm voice I already knew, "Rhonda, tomorrow we need you to take us to the mall. The kids want to see the city, and we want to do some shopping. What time can you take us?" It wasn't a question. It was an order disguised as a polite request. I told her I would think about it and locked myself in the bathroom, the only place I could be alone for 5 minutes. I sat on the floor with my back against the door and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything crushing my chest. My phone vibrated. It was a text from David. "Got a buyer. Businessman who needs to close fast. Offering $400,000. Cash. Closing in 2 weeks. Good price considering the urgency. Accept." My hands trembled as I wrote the answer. $400,000. It was less than the apartment was truly worth, probably $50,000 below the market price. But it was enough to buy something smaller, simpler, just for me, and I would still have money left over to live comfortably. I wrote, "Accept. Proceed with everything." I sent the message and kept looking at the screen until the reply appeared. "Perfect. We'll send you the paperwork tomorrow." I came out of the bathroom and found Sarah waiting outside with an annoyed look. "Finally, I thought you had died in there." She shoved past me without apologizing. I walked into the living room and saw my apartment destroyed. There were dirty glasses on every surface, crumpled napkins on the floor, wine stains on my rug, food crumbs everywhere. The sofa where I was supposed to sleep was occupied by 2 of the teenagers who had fallen asleep watching television. There was nowhere for me. In my own house, there was nowhere for me. I grabbed a blanket from the closet and went out onto the balcony. It was cold, but I didn't care. I wrapped myself in the blanket and sat on the plastic chair I used for reading in the afternoons. From there, I could see the city still awake, the lights of other buildings, hear the distant echo of music and celebrations. I thought about James. What would he say if he could see me now? He would probably be angry. He would tell me to kick them all out, to defend my space, not to let them trample on me. But James was always braver than I was. I had spent my whole life being compliant, seeking approval, swallowing words and needs so as not to bother anyone. Until now. The next 2 days were a calculated hell. Esther insisted on being taken sightseeing around the city. The children broke a vase that had belonged to my grandmother. Bethany came by every afternoon to supervise that I was treating her family well, as if I were an employee who needed surveillance. Robert called but never asked how I was. He just gave me instructions. Buy this. Take my mother-in-law there. Be patient. Patience. As if patience were an infinite resource that I was obligated to provide. On the morning of the 3rd day, David arrived with the papers. Esther opened the door, thinking it was someone else, and almost turned him away. I intervened quickly. He's my accountant. He's here to review some tax matters. We locked ourselves in my bedroom, which I had finally reclaimed because Esther and Randy decided the living room sofa was more comfortable. I signed every paper with trembling but determined hands. The sale was done. The apartment was no longer mine. I had exactly 14 days to vacate. When David left, I sat on my bed and looked around. Every corner of this room had a history. There, in that corner, James used to sit and read the newspaper on Sundays. In that closet, I kept Robert's clothes when he was a child, which I could never bring myself to throw away. At that window, I used to stand and watch the sunrise on the days I couldn't sleep. And now, all that was going, by my own decision. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. I left the room and found the whole family eating the lunch I had prepared. Bethany was there again, sitting at the head of my table as if she were the owner. She saw me and smiled. "Rhonda, I need to talk to you after we eat. I have a few suggestions on how you could organize your house better." And that's when I decided it was time to start. I sat down at the table with everyone. I ate in silence while Bethany talked nonstop about her ideas for improving my apartment. She wanted me to paint the walls white because the current ivory color made everything look too old. She suggested I throw away half my furniture because, at your age, you need something more modern and minimalist. She said my kitchen needed a complete remodel because the dark wood cabinets were out of style. She spoke about my home as if it were a renovation project she would direct, as if I were merely an obstacle in her path to the aesthetic perfection she imagined. Everyone nodded, gave opinions, added suggestions. Randy said the bathroom needed new tiles. Esther commented that my curtains were horrible, and that she knew a place that sold gorgeous ones. No one asked if I wanted to change anything. No one considered that perhaps I loved my apartment exactly as it was. We finished eating, and Bethany followed me into the kitchen while I gathered the dishes. She leaned against the counter, blocking my path to the sink, and said in that voice she used when she wanted to sound reasonable, but was actually giving orders. "Rhonda, I know this has been a lot for you. Having my whole family here must be exhausting. But I want you to understand something important. Robert and I are building our future, and we need you to be part of the team. That means being flexible, being available when we need you, understanding that our family now includes mine." She paused, looked me directly in the eyes, and continued. "The truth is, you live alone in an apartment that's too big. We've been thinking that maybe it would be better for you to move to something smaller, more manageable. That way, you'd have fewer responsibilities and could be more available to help us when we need you to watch future grandchildren or host visitors." There it was, what they really wanted. It wasn't just for me to be hospitable or generous. They wanted me to reduce my life, to make myself smaller, more convenient, more available for their needs. They wanted me to sell my apartment, move to something insignificant, and use the leftover money to finance their comfortable life. They had probably already planned how to spend that money. A down payment on a bigger house, that trip to Europe they mentioned, private college for the children they didn't even have yet. I would be the useful grandmother who lives in a tiny room, waiting for their call, existing only to serve them. Bethany awaited my answer, with that expression of someone who is being tremendously reasonable and generous. I put the dishes in the sink, calmly dried my hands, and said to her, You're right, Bethany. I've been thinking the exact same thing. Her face lit up, clearly surprised that I was giving in so easily. Really? Oh, Rhonda, what a relief. I knew you'd understand. Robert is going to be so happy. You'll see. It's best for everyone. I nodded, smiled, and added, in fact, I've already taken the first step. I hired someone to help me with the whole process. She practically jumped for joy. Already? Wow, that's incredible. When are you starting to look at options? I can help you. I know some really good real estate people who will get you something small and cheap. That won't be necessary, I said, maintaining my casual tone. I've already found the perfect solution. Bethany tilted her head, confused. So fast? And what did you find? I looked her directly in the eyes and replied, I already sold this apartment. The deal closed 3 hours ago. I have 2 weeks to vacate. The color drained from her face. She froze, her mouth slightly open, processing what she had just heard. What? What did you say? Her voice came out as a strangled whisper. I said I sold the apartment. It's signed. It's done. The new owner takes possession in exactly 14 days. Bethany stepped back one pace, then another. Her expression changed from shock to fury in a matter of seconds. You can't do that. You can't sell without consulting Robert. This apartment is practically his too. It's his inheritance. There was the naked truth. For them, I was just a temporary administrator of assets they already considered theirs. This apartment is in my name, I said firmly. Only in my name. James left it to me, not to Robert, and I can do whatever I want with it. Bethany started pacing, running her hands through her hair. This is crazy. You're crazy. How much did you sell it for? Who did you sell it to? Did you consult a lawyer? They surely ripped you off. Women your age are easy targets for scammers. I leaned against the counter, crossed my arms, and maintained my calm. I sold it for $400,000. The buyer is a serious businessman. Everything is legal and certified. And no, I was not ripped off. I simply made a decision about my own life and my own property. Bethany pointed a trembling finger at me. You have to cancel that sale, right now. Call whoever convinced you to do this stupid thing and cancel everything. I laughed. It was a soft but genuine laugh that seemed to infuriate her even more. I'm not canceling anything. This is my decision, and it's final. She bolted out of the kitchen, screaming, Robert, Robert, come here right now. Everyone in the living room fell silent. Robert ran in, alarmed. What is it? What happened? Bethany grabbed his arm, almost shaking him. Your mother sold the apartment. She sold your apartment without consulting you. You have to do something. Robert looked at me as if I had told him the earth was flat. What? Mom, is that true? I nodded. It's true. I sold the apartment. The deal is closed. He shook his head, confused. But why? Why would you do something like that? Where are you going to go? What were you thinking? I was thinking about me, I replied, with a calm I didn't know I possessed. For the first time in many years, I was thinking about what I need, what I want, about my own peace. Robert ran his hands through his hair, clearly panicking. But this apartment... Mom, this place is worth a lot of money. You should have consulted me before selling it. I could have advised you, gotten a better price, verified that they weren't cheating you. And there it was again. The assumption that I was incapable of making decisions, that I needed his permission, his supervision, his approval. Esther and Randy entered the kitchen, followed by the rest of the family. Everyone wanted to know what was happening. Bethany explained it to them in a hysterical voice, dramatizing every detail, painting me as a senile old woman who had done something unforgivable. Esther looked at me with disappointment. Rhonda, this affects all of us. Where are we supposed to stay when we come to visit you all? Randy added, This is very selfish of you. Family sacrifices for family. Susan intervened. And did you think about the children? They were already used to coming here. I looked at all of them standing in my kitchen, circling around me as if I were the one who had done something terrible, as if the act of taking control of my own life were an unforgivable crime. I did not consult you, I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear me clearly, because it wasn't your decision. This is my apartment, my life, my choice, and I am tired of existing only for the convenience of others. Robert took a step toward me, his face red with fury. Convenience? Is that what you call family? Mom, you're behaving like a spoiled child. This is ridiculous. Tomorrow we're going to a lawyer, and we're canceling that sale. I stood my ground. I'm not canceling anything, Robert. It's decided. He slammed his hand on the counter, making the dishes jump. Then don't count on me for anything. If you want to destroy your life, go ahead, but don't expect me to be there to pick you up when you realize the mistake you made. The silence that followed was dense and heavy. Bethany's eyes were filled with tears of rage. Esther looked at me as if I were a stranger. The others just seemed uncomfortable, waiting to see what would happen next. And I, standing in the middle of my kitchen, felt something strange and wonderful. I felt peace. Robert stormed out of the kitchen, dragging Bethany with him. I heard the apartment door slam shut with a bang that shook the walls. They were gone. My son had left without looking back, without trying to understand, without even asking me why I had made that decision. The others remained standing there, looking at me as if I had just confessed to a horrible crime. Esther broke the silence in a trembling voice. I can't believe what you just did. You've destroyed your own son. Do you know the stress you just caused him? Bethany is sensitive. This will affect her terribly. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Bethany is sensitive. The woman who had invaded my house, rearranged my things, criticized every aspect of my life, and planned my future without consulting me, was the sensitive one. I think it's time for everyone to start looking for somewhere else to stay, I said in a clear, firm voice. As you heard, this apartment is no longer mine. The new owner takes possession in 2 weeks, and I need to start packing my things. Randy crossed his arms, his face dark red. Are you kicking us out? After we came all this way, trusting your hospitality? I held his gaze without flinching. No one invited you. You arrived without warning, assuming I had no life of my own, that my space was yours by right, and I made the mistake of allowing it. But that mistake ends now. Esther put a hand to her chest, as if she were having a heart attack. This is unbelievable. You are a cruel woman, Rhonda, cruel and selfish. Now I understand why Robert had to seek true love in our family. You never knew how to give him what he needed. Her words were designed to hurt me, to make me doubt, to break my resolve. And maybe a week ago, they would have succeeded. But something had changed inside me. I no longer cared what they thought. I no longer needed their approval or their feigned affection. You have until noon tomorrow to find another place, I said, walking toward the living room. You can stay tonight, but tomorrow I need you to leave. Sarah, who had been quiet this whole time, finally spoke. We don't have money for a hotel. We spent everything on the trip, thinking we would stay here. What are we supposed to do? That is not my problem, I said simply. You made the decision to come without confirming. Now you have to make the decision of what to do next. The rest of the day was tense and silent. Bethany's family gathered in the living room, making calls, searching for cheap hotels, complaining quietly about how awful I was. The children, sensing the tension, became restless and tearful. No one ate the dinner I had prepared. No one spoke to me. They treated me as if I were invisible, as if I no longer existed to them. And for the first time in days, I felt relieved. That night, I slept in my own bed, in my own room. I locked the door and lay down looking at the ceiling, listening to the angry murmurs coming from the living room. I felt no guilt. I felt no regret. I only felt a deep exhaustion and a strange sense of freedom. The next morning, I woke up early and found the living room empty. They had all left during the night without saying goodbye, leaving a monumental mess. There was garbage everywhere, dirty dishes piled up in the sink and on the table, stains on the sofa, marks on the walls. My fern plant was still dead on the balcony. No one had bothered to clean up the spilled dirt. I found a note from Esther on the dining table, written in large, furious handwriting. I hope you are happy with your decision. We will tell everyone what kind of person you really are. May God forgive you for what you did to your family. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. I put on my most comfortable clothes and spent the entire day cleaning. I scrubbed, swept, mopped, washed every surface until my hands hurt. I wanted to erase every trace of that invasion, every footprint of those horrible days. While I worked, my phone rang constantly. Robert called over and over. I rejected every call. Finally, he left me a voicemail. His tone had changed from fury to something that pretended to be conciliatory, but actually sounded manipulative. "Mom, I know you're upset. We all are. But this has gotten out of hand. I talked to Bethany, and we're willing to forget everything if you cancel the sale of the apartment. We can start over. I'll help you set boundaries with her family, but you have to cancel that sale. Please, think of me. Your only son." I deleted the message without replying. There was no going back. And although he still didn't understand it, this wasn't about punishing him. It was about saving myself. The following days were spent alone, packing my things. David had helped me find a small one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of Los Angeles. It cost half of what buying something similar would, but it was perfect for me. It had a small balcony that could fit 6 pots, a compact but functional kitchen, and large windows that let in a lot of light. I signed the rental contract using part of the money from the sale. While packing, I realized how many things I had accumulated over a lifetime. Boxes full of clothes I didn't wear, books I wouldn't read again, decorative objects that only gathered dust. I separated everything into 3 categories: what I would take, what I would donate, and what I would throw away. It was liberating to get rid of so much weight. Each box I filled for donation felt like letting go of a piece of the past I no longer needed to carry. I kept only the essentials: my favorite clothes, my most cherished books, the photographs of James and Robert as a child, my mother's china, the plants that survived the invasion. Robert showed up a week later. He rang the doorbell insistently until I opened it. He looked unwell, with deep dark circles under his eyes and wrinkled clothes. He walked in without an invitation and looked at the boxes piled everywhere, the empty walls where pictures once hung, the bare spaces where furniture used to be. "Mom, this is real," he said in a broken voice. "You're actually doing it." I leaned against the wall and looked at him, this 42-year-old man who was still expecting me to solve his problems, to facilitate his life, to sacrifice my peace for his comfort. "Yes, Robert, it's real." He slumped into one of the few remaining chairs. He covered his face with his hands. "I don't understand why, Mom. What did we do that was so terrible for you to punish us like this?" And there was the problem. He saw it as a punishment, as something I was doing to him. He couldn't conceive that this was not about him at all. "It's not a punishment," I said, sitting across from him. "It's a decision. I decided to reclaim my life, my space, my right to exist for something more than serving others." "But I'm your son," he said, looking up, his eyes red. "Family is supposed to take care of each other." I felt something soften in my chest. He was my son, after all. I had raised him, loved him, given everything for him for years. But that love could no longer come at the cost of my own destruction. Family does take care of each other, Robert. But caring doesn't mean disappearing. Caring doesn't mean having no boundaries. And caring definitely doesn't mean allowing yourself to be treated as if you don't matter. He shook his head. "We never treated you as if you didn't matter. That's an exaggeration." I looked at him squarely. "Robert, 12 people arrived at my house without warning at 6 o'clock in the morning. They occupied every space. They broke my things. They kicked me out of my own bed. And you asked me to be nice to them. You never asked how I was. You never considered that maybe I had other plans. You treated me like an available resource, not a person." He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. Probably because deep down, he knew it was true. "And Bethany?" he finally asked. "She's devastated. She says you hate her, that you've always hated her." I sighed, tired. "I don't hate Bethany, but I'm also not going to continue allowing her to run my life. And if you can't see the difference between hating someone and simply setting boundaries with them, then we have a bigger problem." Robert remained silent for a long time. Then he asked quietly, "Where are you going to go?" I gave him the address of my new apartment. He wrote it down in his phone. "Can I visit you there?" The question surprised me. I had expected more fury, more attempts at manipulation. "You can," I said, "but with the following conditions. You call ahead before you come. You come alone or with Bethany, but not with her whole family. You respect my schedule and my space, and you accept that I won't be available every time you need something." He nodded slowly, processing. He got up to leave. At the door, he turned and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen in years, genuine vulnerability. "Mom, do you still love me?" The question broke my heart. "Of course I love you, Robert. I will always love you. But loving myself is not incompatible with loving you." He left without saying more. The last few days in the apartment were strange and melancholic. I walked through the empty rooms, hearing the echo of my steps, touching the walls that were once filled with photographs and memories. Every corner whispered stories to me. There, James had spilled paint when we painted the living room ivory 20 years ago. There, Robert had hidden his first lost tooth while waiting for the tooth fairy. There, I had cried for hours after the funeral. This place had contained my entire adult life, my greatest joys, and my deepest sorrows. And now, I was letting it go. The night before the move, I sat on the floor of the empty living room with a glass of wine. I had no furniture left. I had sold or donated everything except the essentials I would take to the new place. The moonlight streamed through the window, creating long shadows on the hardwood floor. I thought about all the decisions that had led me to this moment. Every time I had said yes when I wanted to say no. Every time I had swallowed my discomfort to keep the peace. Every small surrender that had eventually led me to lose myself completely. But I also thought about the strength I didn't know I had, the capacity to rebuild myself that I had discovered at 69. My phone vibrated. It was a text from Henry, my brother. "I'll be there early tomorrow to help with the move. I'm proud of you, sis." Those words made me cry. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief. Someone in my family understood. Someone supported me without judging. I replied with a simple thank you because I didn't have the words to express everything I felt. That night, I slept on the floor on an air mattress, looking at the ceiling I had looked at thousands of nights before. But this time was different. This time, I knew I was choosing my own path. Henry arrived at 7 in the morning with a borrowed pickup truck and 2 of his friends to help load. He hugged me tightly without saying anything, and in that embrace, I understood that he knew everything I had been through without needing explanations. We loaded the boxes, the few pieces of furniture I was taking, the surviving plants. The process was quick and efficient. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the apartment was completely empty. I did one last walkthrough of each room. I ran my hand over the walls. I looked out the windows one last time. I inhaled the familiar scent of the place that had been my home for decades. "Are you ready?" Henry asked from the doorway. I nodded, grabbed my purse, and walked out. I closed the door behind me, put the keys in the envelope I would leave for the new owner at the building management office, and walked toward the elevator without looking back. The drive to my new apartment was silent. Henry respected my need to process everything in quietness. I looked out the window, watching the city pass, feeling that I was leaving behind a version of myself that no longer existed. The Rhonda who lived to please, who made herself small so others could fit, who measured every word so as not to offend. That woman stayed in that 7th-floor apartment. My new home was in an older but well-maintained building, in a quiet neighborhood full of trees. The apartment was small, perhaps 1/3 the size of the previous one, but when I opened the door and walked in for the first time with my things, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt that it was mine, truly mine, not a space I had to share, not a place others could invade, but my absolute territory. We spent the day setting everything up. Henry assembled my new bed, hung the beige curtains I had bought, and helped organize the kitchen. His friends installed the shelves in the living room and connected the appliances. By the afternoon, everything was in place. The apartment looked cozy and bright. I had placed the plants on the balcony where they received direct morning sun. The books were organized on the new shelf. The photographs of James were on the nightstand. My mother's china occupied the kitchen cabinet. Everything that truly mattered was there. Henry and his friends left at nightfall after refusing my attempt to pay them. "You're my sister," Henry said. You don't charge family for helping." He hugged me again and whispered in my ear, "You did the right thing. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I was left alone in my new space. I made coffee in my Italian stovetop espresso maker, sat on the balcony in a new plastic chair, and watched the sunset. The buildings here were lower. I could see more sky. I heard birds singing in the trees on the street. The air smelled different, cleaner, fresher. I took out my phone and saw that I had several messages. One was from David confirming that the money from the sale had already been deposited into my account, $400,000. After paying the first year's rent in advance, the furniture, and some moving expenses, I had more than $360,000 saved, money that was completely mine, that no one could touch, that would give me security for the rest of my life. The other messages were from Robert, several texts written throughout the day. "Have you moved yet? Do you need help? Mom, please answer me. Bethany wants to talk to you." I didn't respond to any of them. I wasn't ready yet. I needed this time for myself, to settle in, to get used to this new version of my life. There was one last message from a number I didn't recognize. I opened it, and it was from Esther. "I hope you're happy. Robert is suffering because of you. You are a terrible mother." I read the message twice, then I deleted it and blocked the number. I wasn't going to allow that venom into my new space. That night, I ate a simple dinner, vegetable soup and toast. I washed my single plate and my single mug, dried them, and put them away. Then I took a long bath in the small tub, using lavender salts I had bought especially to celebrate the start of my new life. I put on my most comfortable pajamas, made my bed with new sheets that smelled like the store, and went to bed early. The bed was firm and comfortable. The pillows were perfect. There was no one else in the apartment making noise, taking up space, demanding attention. Just me, my breathing, the precious silence of chosen solitude. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply, without nightmares, without waking up startled. I slept like someone who had finally arrived home. The first few weeks in my new apartment were about discovery and adjustment. I learned the sounds of the building, the plumbing that made a strange noise every morning at 6, the steps of my upstairs neighbor who left for work at 7:30, the barking of the dog next door that sounded at 5 in the afternoon when its owner returned. These were new sounds that were part of my new routine. I explored the neighborhood, walking slowly along the tree-lined streets. I found a small bakery 2 blocks away where the bread came out hot at 8 in the morning. I discovered a park with wooden benches where older ladies gathered to knit on Thursday afternoons. I joined them without announcing myself too much. I simply sat down with my knitting, and eventually we started talking. No one there knew my story. No one knew about the sold apartment, the family that had invaded me, the drastic decision I had made. To them, I was simply Rhonda, a 69-year-old woman who lived alone and knitted mustard-colored scarves. It was liberating to be anonymous, to start from scratch, to build relationships based on who I was now and not on who I had been before. One of the ladies, whose name was Rose, invited me to her place for tea. She lived in the same building as me, 3 floors up. Her apartment was similar to mine, but decorated with hundreds of photographs of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told me her children visited her every Sunday without fail, that she never felt alone, that family was the most important thing in her life. I listened to her story with a mixture of envy and relief. Envy because she clearly had what I had lost, or perhaps never had, a family that genuinely valued her. But also relief because her life, though beautiful, was not mine. I had chosen a different path. I had chosen peace over obligation, chosen solitude over toxic company. And although there were still moments of doubt, questions that woke me up at 3 in the morning questioning if I had done the right thing, most days I felt lighter than ever. Robert finally showed up on a Tuesday afternoon. He had sent a text that morning asking if he could visit me. I replied yes, only him, and gave him the address. He arrived at 4 o'clock sharp, punctual as he had always been when something mattered to him. He brought a bag from the bakery I already knew, with sweet rolls and cookies. He knocked softly on the door, and when I opened it, I saw that he had cut his hair, that he was wearing clean, ironed clothes, that he had made an effort to look presentable. "Hi, Mom," he said cautiously, as if I were a wild animal that might flee at any moment. "Hi, son. Come in." I let him in and watched his eyes scan the small space. The apartment probably fit 3 times into the living room of his house, but it was clean, orderly, full of light. "It's nice," he finally said, and it sounded genuine. Different, but nice. I made coffee for both of us, and we sat at the small dining nook by the window. There was an awkward silence, filled with all the words we hadn't said, the screams we never screamed, the apologies neither of us had offered yet. "Mom, he started, then stopped. He took a deep breath and tried again. "I've been thinking a lot. About what you said. About how we treated you. And you're right." Those last 2 words surprised me so much that I almost spilled my coffee. "You're right," he repeated. "We didn't see you. We didn't consider you. We treated you as if your only purpose was to be available for us. And that was awful." I felt something loosen in my chest. I hadn't known how much I needed to hear those words until that moment. "Thank you for saying that," I replied softly. "You don't know how much that means to me." He nodded, nervously playing with his mug. "Bethany doesn't see it that way yet. She thinks you overreacted, that you sold the apartment just to punish us. We've been fighting a lot about it." I didn't say anything, waiting for him to continue. I told her that if she can't respect my decisions about my relationship with you, then we have a serious problem. She didn't take it well. She says I have to choose between the 2 of you. I felt a pang of guilt mixed with something darker, something that looked dangerously like satisfaction. "I don't want you to choose, Robert. I don't want to destroy your marriage." And it was true. No matter how much damage Bethany had caused me, I didn't want to be the reason my son lost his family. "You're not destroying it, she is," he said. "She's destroying it with her inability to see that she was wrong. We've been sleeping in separate rooms for weeks. She doesn't speak to me unless necessary. And honestly, Mom, for the first time in a long time, I'm seeing things I ignored before. The way she manipulates me, how she always has to be in control, how any boundary I try to set turns into a war. Hearing my son describe his marriage that way broke my heart. But it also made me realize something important. My decision, though drastic, had put a mirror up to everyone. It had forced them to see the toxic dynamics we had normalized. "What are you going to do?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe couples therapy, if she agrees. Maybe separate for a while. I don't know. But what I do know is that I want to mend my relationship with you, and I want to do it right this time." We spent the next 2 hours talking. Truly talking, something we hadn't done in years. I told him about my new routine, about Rose and the ladies at the park, about the bakery and the neighbor's dog. He told me about his job, about projects he was excited about dreams he had buried because Bethany considered them impractical. We talked about James. We recalled stories we had both forgotten. We laughed together for the first time in a long time. When he left, it was already night. He hugged me long at the door and whispered, "I love you, Mom, and I'm sorry for everything." After he left, I sat on the balcony under the stars. The night air was cool and clean. My plants looked healthy in their new pots. The city sounded distant, yet present. And I felt complete. Not happy in the traditional sense, because there was still pain and loss and unanswered questions, but complete, whole, mine. Days turned into weeks. Robert visited me every Tuesday, alone, respecting my space and my time. He told me about his life. I told him about mine. We were learning to relate as adults, not as mother and son, where one must always give and the other can always take. It was different. It was better. Bethany hadn't attempted to contact me. According to Robert, she was still angry, still feeling like the victim of a terrible injustice. I had stopped worrying about changing her perspective. One afternoon, while watering my plants on the balcony, I received a call from an unknown number. I answered cautiously. It was Esther. Her voice sounded different, softer, less aggressive. "Rhonda, it's me. Please don't hang up." I remained silent, waiting. "I just wanted to tell you that maybe I didn't understand the situation correctly. Bethany told me her side of things, and I believed her without question." But I've been talking to Robert, and he told me things I didn't know. About how we arrived at your house, about what happened. I still said nothing. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, she continued. I just wanted you to know that I understand now why you did what you did, and that I'm sorry I was part of the problem. They were simple but sincere words. Thank you for calling, Esther, I finally said. That means something to me. We hung up shortly after. I don't know if I'll talk to her again. I don't know if our relationship can be repaired, but the gesture mattered. 6 months have passed since that morning of December 31st, when 12 people rang my intercom expecting me to simply open the door and disappear for their convenience. 6 months since I made the most terrifying and liberating decision of my life. Now, sitting on my small balcony watching the sunrise paint the sky in orange and pink, I can say with certainty that I have no regrets. Some mornings, I still wake up thinking about the old apartment, the memories I left there, the life I built over decades and sold in a matter of days. But those thoughts no longer come with pain. They come with a gentle melancholy, like remembering a beautiful dream that has ended. My relationship with Robert has completely changed. I am no longer the mother who exists to solve his problems or facilitate his life. We are two adults who respect each other, who seek each other out because they want to be together, not because one needs something from the other. He visits me every week. Sometimes he brings food we buy together at the market. Sometimes we just sit and drink coffee and talk about nothing important. He tells me about his job without expecting me to understand all the technical details. I tell him about my knitting classes in the park, about Rose and the other ladies, about the book I'm reading. They are simple but real conversations. Bethany and he finally went to couples therapy. According to Robert, it has been difficult but necessary. She is learning to let go of control. He is learning to set boundaries. I don't know if their marriage will survive. Honestly, some damage is too deep to be fully repaired. But that is not my battle. I did my part. I saved myself. Now he has to decide whether he saves his own or lets go of what no longer serves him. Bethany has not contacted me directly. She still believes my reaction was an overreaction. I don't expect a full apology from her. Some people can never fully admit when they are wrong because their ego is too fragile. Bethany's family disappeared from my life as quickly as they had appeared. Esther called that one time and then nothing more. I don't know what happened to them, where they are, or if they are still speaking ill of me at their family gatherings. And I discovered something wonderful. I don't care. For years, I worried so much about what others thought, about keeping the peace, about being loved and accepted. Now I understand that the peace I achieved by sacrificing my dignity was never real peace. It was just silence bought with pieces of my soul. My life now is small, but completely mine. I wake up when I want. I eat what I want for breakfast. I spend my days doing exactly what I feel like without asking anyone for permission. I read books until 3 o'clock in the morning if I feel like it. I leave dirty dishes in the sink all night if I'm tired. I rearrange the furniture every 2 weeks because I can. I eat ice cream straight from the container while watching old movies. They are small freedoms that may seem insignificant to others, but to me, they are revolutionary. The knitting group in the park became my new chosen family. There are 6 women between 60 and 75, all with their own stories of loss and survival. One of them, Martha, also sold her house after her adult children tried to force her to move into a nursing home. Another, Carol, stopped talking to her eldest daughter after years of emotional abuse. Not all the stories are dramatic, but we all share something fundamental. We learned that it's okay to choose yourself, even when the world tells you that you are selfish for doing so. With the money I had left over from the sale of the apartment, besides paying my rent in advance, I opened a savings account that I won't touch unless absolutely necessary. I invested the rest conservatively with the help of a financial advisor whom Henry recommended to me. I have enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life without depending on anyone. That financial independence gives me a security I had never felt before. I know that if something happens, if I get sick, if I need help, I have the resources to handle it without having to beg for favors or endure humiliations. A month ago, I adopted a cat. He is an old animal, 11 years old, gray with white patches, that no one wanted at the shelter because everyone looks for baby kittens. His name is Randy, ironically the same name as Bethany's father, although I wasn't thinking of that when I chose it. He is a quiet cat who spends most of the day sleeping on the armchair by the window. At night, he climbs onto my bed and purrs against my leg. He is a simple but comforting companion. He demands nothing except food and water. He doesn't judge, doesn't criticize, doesn't invade. He is the perfect companion for this stage of my life. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't made that decision. If I had continued to be the compliant Rhonda, the perfect mother-in-law, the self-sacrificing mother, I would probably still be in that big apartment, waiting for Robert's calls, enduring the invasive visits of Bethany's family, swallowing my discomfort day after day until there was nothing left of me. I would have died eventually, maybe in a few years, maybe in a decade, without ever having truly lived a single day for myself. That alternative version of my future terrifies me more than anything. I understand now that what I did wasn't revenge, it was survival. I didn't sell the apartment to punish Robert or Bethany. I sold it to save myself from disappearing completely. And although the price was high, although I lost things I cannot recover, although there are relationships that will never be what they were, I gained something infinitely more valuable. I gained myself back. This morning, as I made my coffee in the Italian stovetop espresso maker that survived the move, I thought about that first phrase I said to myself 6 months ago. The day I discovered my son had given away my home without asking for permission, I understood that I had lost more than my privacy. I had lost my place in the world. But I was wrong. I hadn't lost it. I had only loaned it out for too long to people who didn't value it. And now, I've taken it back. My place in the world is not an apartment. It's not being the perfect mother or the compliant mother-in-law. My place in the world is exactly where I am now, in a small space that smells of coffee and lavender, surrounded by plants that I care for, with an old cat purring in the armchair, living a life that I consciously chose to build. The moral of my story is neither simple nor comfortable. I can't say that everything turned out perfectly or that there were no losses. But I can say this. Sometimes, to reclaim your peace, you have to be willing to lose everything. And when you finally do it, when you truly stand firm in your truth and say no more, you discover that the only thing you truly lose is the weight that was never yours to carry. The rest, everything that truly matters, comes with you. And that, after 69 years of existing for others, is more than enough. Now I know that home is not where you live, but where you are heard. And for the first time in a long time, I am listening to myself.